Hello and welcome to another episode of For Zion's Sake, the CUFI UK podcast. My name is Alex and I'm joined here by Alistair.
Hello.
And this week we're going to be looking at the BBC and their promotion of Hamas propaganda. We're also going to be letting you know why we think this could have breached the UK's anti-terror laws.
Plus, we will be discussing how Hamas support was given a platform at one of the top UK universities.
Just the one?
Well, maybe all of them. But we're going to be discussing the event at London School of Economics.
That's right. We're also going to be looking at the situation in Syria and the horrific persecution of Christians and other minority groups. But importantly, we will be looking at how Israel may get involved.
So, Alex, it's good to be back talking with one another. It's been a while since you and I have both sat together on the podcast because, well, first of all, we took it in turns, didn't we, every alternate week to have cold or flu between us.
Yeah.
But you've been a bit unwell, especially. Yeah. And so thank you to Des for stepping in the last podcast. But it's great that you're back.
Thank you.
And we've also been very, very busy. We've had the regional event for the Midlands, which was in Burton-upon-Trent, and we had a fantastic day, didn't we, at the weekend?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it was really good meeting. Many supporters, getting feedback from them. I think, obviously we wanted to be an encouragement to them, but I think they were equally, if not more so, an encouragement to us as well. So that was really good.
Yes.
And our voices all held up and everything, even though we've all been sort of battling the flu and things, as you said.
It was wonderful to connect with CUFI supporters in the Midlands, others who came even further afield, and to be able to share our heart for Israel and to really experience especially a unity with others that have a heart for Israel and want to do more and want to pray for Israel and bless Israel. We had a great time. So we're very appreciative for Burton-upon-Trent for hosting us, and we will be having another regional conference in June. It seems a long way off. It will come very quickly. That's going to be in Bristol, and if you would like to attend that, it is going to be on the 21st of June, and details can be found at www.cufi.org.uk/events. The link is in the description. And if you would like to invite a speaker from CUFI to come to your church to speak at a service or at any other event, it can be on a Sunday, it could be in midweek, then please do let us know, and we would very much like to come and share with you and with your congregation. So please send us an email or telephone the office if that gives you an idea of something that you can do to provide CUFI with an opportunity, which we are very grateful to take, to be able to share about why Christians should stand with Israel. So let's move on then, Alex, to the topic, shall we? Let's begin with the BBC.
Yeah.
The BBC has been at it again in providing a platform for Hamas propaganda. And this goes back a couple of weeks. We've not had an opportunity, you and I, to sit down to discuss this, so we're going to talk about it now. This was a documentary that the BBC aired. Well, they effectively commissioned this documentary. It was a BBC documentary. It was withdrawn after it was placed on at peak time television viewing. It was called Gaza, How to Survive a War Zone. And yes, it was funded by the UK licence fee payer. It cost the BBC £400,000, and it was loaded with anti-Israel propaganda. The narrator, who was a 14-year-old boy, was actually the son of a Hamas official. And so that was the first piece of information which drew attention to this. The BBC denied that they knew that he was the son of Hamas official, but they have said that they're going to be investigating it. They're going to be investigating the third-party production company that it commissioned as well. Effectively, they are investigating themselves to find out whether they have been promoting Hamas propaganda. It is farcical.
Yeah.
And we're going to go into that. We're going to explain some of the ways in which the BBC has whitewashed anti-Semitism within that. But also, I mean, how they did not know when this went through various channels, including, it was revealed quite recently, actually, that one of the top BBC executives, production executives, viewed this before it went out. You would hope they would do, but that's confirmed. So they have watched this. They should know who they are putting on the screen for the UK and the world to hear. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, the BBC prides itself as being, you know, one of these fact checkers that, you know, get the truth from us kind of thing. And they are actually very well respected around the world. Opinion polls consistently show that the BBC is the world's most trusted news organisation. Yet we, you know, people who analyse these things and, you know, probably read too much into what the BBC says at times, you know, we have seen this happening over a long period of time where the BBC has been promoting anti-Israel narratives. It's been excusing Hamas's evil, basically. And there is just something going on at the BBC which we don't agree with at all. I think anyone who would have watched the documentary would have, you know, from a pro-Israel perspective, probably would have seen problems with it. But actually, when you drill down into it, it gets far worse than what it looks like on the surface.
Yeah.
And I think we do have to give some credit to David Collier, who is an investigative journalist, who actually did loads of work back with sort of anti-Semitism in the Labour Party and things like that. But he is, you know, on the warpath against, you know, the Hamas propaganda of the BBC. And he, you know, he sort of said, I caught them, the BBC, in bed with Hamas. And that is literally what they did. Like, as you said, the main child who was the narrator of the child, and also one of the kids in the episode, he was the son of a Hamas official. He's been used in actual Channel 4, a documentary before, where he had a different dad to the one who's his real dad, and he's known to be a child actor. And they added, you know, they had different scripts for the children, so it wasn't even a real documentary where they were giving, you know, factual information. It was actually a production that was acted out and scripted out. He was saying afterwards in a one-on-one video that he did that he was given the script and then eventually made the narrator because of how well he was doing, sort of thing, by the director. They added sound effects to it. The children were clearly reading off of scripts as they were saying things, and it was all a bid to paint the image that, you know, basically it was all an attempt to make Israel look bad and the Palestinians look like innocent victims.
Because they could, a true documentary producers could have done a documentary looking at how children in Israel have been affected post 7th of October. What it's like for children to have experienced 7th of October. They could have done what it's like for children in Gaza if they really wanted to. But they didn't. There's no documentary covering what children have experienced in Israel. They could have effectively, you know, covered both, but they didn't.
No.
Because this is, you know, pure anti-Israel propaganda.
Yeah. I mean, they could have literally found children in Gaza who have suffered. I mean, there is suffering in Gaza. There are children who suffered. But instead they had to manufacture it to make it look worse than it is, because it's all part of the propaganda campaign to try and demonize Israel and taint the world's view of Israel. And the BBC were willful vessels of this propaganda, and they pumped it out to the UK as... And it basically exploits the trust which people put into the BBC. Because a lot of people will be seeing this. They, you know, we've worked in, you know, making videos, video editing, things like that. You can tell when there's video editing. You can tell when people's eyes are moving and reading. You know, you notice these things. The average person who's watching is not going to be able to see some of the sort of those elements of it. And also, the average person isn't going to know that there is a son of Hamas there, that money was passed to...
Well, I was just going to say, the BBC were asked, were Hamas paid for for this documentary. Bearing in mind it costs the organisation £400,000.
Yeah.
And the BBC then asked the third-party production company that it commissioned, was money passed on to Hamas?
Yeah.
And their response was no. Funds have not been passed on to Hamas, but they were paid to the mother of the narrator boy.
Yeah.
Now, another way of saying the mother of the narrator boy is the wife of the Hamas official.
Yeah.
Okay? One and the same person, but they did not say the wife of the Hamas official because that isn't palatable for what the BBC was wanting to convey. So they said the mother of the boy. Oh, that's okay then. I mean, the mother of the boy. Look, and by the way, that question has not been fully answered because they are still to yet do a proper audit of the funds. But it just shows the way in which the BBC is trying to cover up, it's trying to conceal so much in this can of worms that has been opened. We'll probably come back onto the money side and the funding, but also let us identify the anti-Semitism that was in this documentary, which the BBC, again, has covered up.
Yeah.
Because among the narration, there were references by those who were being interviewed, words such as jihad. That was translated in the subtitles on the screen, because it was in Arabic, changed to the battle instead of jihad. Also, when there was mention of Jews, it was translated on the subtitles to Israel. Why? Because every time there was a threat or something horrible said about Jews, which is anti-Semitism, they thought they would change it for Israel because it would be more palatable.
Yeah.
Okay? This is covering up, it's whitewashing anti-Semitism. They're lessening the anti-Semitism that was in this documentary. They should have translated it accurately so the viewer could interpret the views. Not interpret, but understand the views of those they were interviewing. Why should they would not do this in any other instance. In fact, Hamas can't even say the word Israel. They refuse the word Israel. They would rather say the quote Zionist regime or Jews. And when they say Jews, so when they say Israel in the streets of London, when they are protesting against Israel and they're calling for the destruction of Israel, they mean Jews.
Exactly.
When they say from the river to the sea, they're talking about the removal not just of Israel, of Jews. And so they are BBC. Well, they've fallen a hook, line, and sinker, quite frankly, but maybe even worse than that. There's something going on, infiltration, complicity. I don't know.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, David Colley was saying that exact thing. At first, he thought this was maybe willful ignorance sort of thing. Maybe it was them trying to be politically correct. He actually now has changed it to them. No, they are anti-Israel. They, the editorial team at the BBC and so forth are against Israel, basically, and are happy to promote Hamas propaganda without properly vetting it and actually adapting it for that message. And I think that that's how I feel. I think, I do think the BBC is in need of drastic reform, but I'm not convinced that it will actually get to that stage without some intervention or something from the government, because there is something dreadfully wrong going on at the BBC at the top.
Because this isn't the first time, of course. We've had months and months of BBC news coverage, again, with attempting to portray Hamas and Israel as two equal sides. And that goes back to this. It's almost like they deliberately didn't want to portray support for Hamas as being truly anti-Jew as what it is.
Yeah, I agree. You just reminded me, actually, when I was just looking for a message. Someone sent me a message the other day. This is on the BBC website, and it says, Indian man killed while entering Israel was victim of job scam. family says. And so you read that and you're like, oh, well, he was basically scammed by someone in Israel. He was trying to enter Israel and he got shot. Well, that Indian man actually was scammed by Jordanians. He entered into Jordan thinking he had a job when he didn't. He then tried to enter Israel from the Jordanian border and was shot by Jordanian police on the Jordanian border. So he was in Jordan, scammed by Jordanians and killed by Jordanians. But the BBC put the headline, Indian killed while entering Israel was victim of job scam. It's like, it's part of almost their editorial guidelines that they have to twist the narrative somehow to demonize Israel at every opportunity.
Yes.
You know, we hear more about when Israel does something wrong. You know, I was saying we probably know more news from the BBC about Israel than we do about our own country, because they're so much focused on every little thing Israel does wrong. They will highlight it and amplify that message.
I know.
And oftentimes they're amplifying Hamas propaganda without properly vetting it.
Yes.
And this whole documentary, this was the thing that, you know, the kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, really. I know it was a very big thing that broke the camel's back, but it's something that finally woke people up, and actually people are realizing, hang on, my money, I'm paying for a license fee to the BBC, which is almost mandatory in this country, and now they're using it to promote Hamas propaganda.
Yes.
And the thing is, I mean, you know, we'll talk.
I think this is very important for international people who are listening and watching this. It's important to point out that in the United Kingdom, to own a television set and watch live television, you have to, by law, purchase a TV license. You can pay it annually or you can pay it monthly. And if you don't, you get a very strong letter through the door threatening action. Now, some people have chosen in recent times not to on principle, but that's problematic for the BBC. And that TV license effectively funds the BBC. It also actually funds partially Channel 4 as well as all the various radio stations, etc., etc. And back in the day when the BBC was the only news channel and BBC radio stations were the radio stations, it seemed like a logical thing to do. But now in the era of on-demand television, satellite, cable packages, etc., etc., there's another argument in terms of the validity and value of a TV license, but it is still required by law to watch any live television. So when you hear Brits complaining about the BBC, it isn't like just complaining about any other sort of commercially funded news channel. This is the public broadcaster. This is a broadcaster which we, the British people, pay for out of our well-earned cash and expect a standard, and not just a standard of journalistic professionalism, but the BBC was actually founded upon biblical principles. When it was first created, it was a bastion of truth and honesty, and to promote Christian values. Well, we've sadly gone a long way from that. But it is right that we hold the BBC to account.
Yes, 100%.
And that is why we have problems with other news channels as well. Don't get me onto Sky News. Okay, we could be talking more about that. But this particular documentary, this wasn't part of its news team, but the same with the BBC News, is that the British people have got to speak up against this.
Yeah, definitely.
Because it's impacting a generation. A generation that is dependent upon the BBC to provide truthful and accurate information about what's going on in the world.
Yeah, exactly. And the BBC right now is betraying the trust of the British people, as I said before. And the problem with it is as well that because they have tried to give this sort of neutral perspective, which isn't neutral, it is anti-Israel in many cases. And because we know of the sort of political views of some of the people behind the BBC who are driving this agenda forward, it's gone from being unbiased, neutral, reporting, which is what the BBC prides itself on, and instead it has become one-sided, very biased, and is agenda-driven reporting. And the problem is, like you were saying about with American TV, Fox News, they have their agenda and they're allowed their agenda because that's what people watch it for. Same with CNN. You have these different viewpoints and they may be, diametrically opposed, but that's perfectly fine. It's a commercial business and whoever gets the most viewers wins, that kind of thing. Whereas the BBC is meant to be this neutral, which is for everybody to enjoy. And as you said, it's funded by the UK by the UK license fee payer. And the thing is, when you actually look into this, we have to remind people Hamas is an outlawed terrorist organization.
Yes.
And so, for example, the Terrorism Act 2008 says that, promoting or raising support for a designated terrorist organization, whether intentional or not, is a criminal offense. So therefore, if you're promoting the messaging of a terrorist organization,
yes.
If you're promoting what they are saying and you're not countering it, that is a criminal offense. Again, sections 15 to 18 of the Terrorism Act 2000 prohibit providing financial resources to terrorist groups directly or indirectly. So if the BBC has made payments to Hamas supporters, not just Hamas,
yes,
Hamas supporters and also Hamas family members,
yes,
and I think we need to point out here, Hamas rules, or it did rule Gaza with an iron fist before, obviously. It still rules Gaza and it still has an iron fist and so forth. But Hamas doesn't even allow women to leave the house without their husband's permission. So if they've, they might use this terminology, which is, oh, we've paid the wife. Well, that wife is not allowed to do anything legally under Hamas law until the husband allows it. So she is under the jurisdiction of the husband, who is a Hamas leader. That child, David Collier sort of explained it very well. He said that the children in the documentary, if they are members of Hamas, they are literally like family members. They are actually like royalty of Hamas. Because the way it works with Hamas, I mean, they were given an apartment that belonged to someone else. They kicked that person out and gave them their apartment. Hamas, as we've said many times on the podcast, they control the aid that comes in. They ensure that their people have the aid. They then sell it to other Palestinians at a profit. Hamas completely controls the situation there. So if you're giving money to the children of that organization, of those leaders, you're giving it to Hamas. There is no way around it. And if you've paid the wife of the husband, that husband controls the wife under the laws within Gaza, and so on and so forth. The other thing I just want to point out is there's also a violation of Section 5 of Ofcom's Broadcasting Code, which mandates accuracy and impartiality in news coverage. And evidence, suggests that the BBC documentary manipulated reality and was not providing accurate information. So they've breached Ofcom rules, they've breached UK terrorism law.
Yes.
And
what you're implying, actually, just going back to the previous point, what you are implying is that the BBC may have committed a crime based on Britain's terror laws.
Yes. And so basically, in my opinion, this now takes it out of the BBC's internal investigation, which is nonsense. And actually, this demands an investigation independently, commissioned by the government, maybe even the police force, I don't know. But someone needs to investigate the BBC to ensure that UK taxpayer money is not being used to fund terror, that the BBC is not breaching, into terrorist laws.
Yes.
And that it's not breaching Ofcom rules. Because, we know when you breach Ofcom...
three-pronged areas that need to be investigated, not by the BBC themselves. The BBC currently are marking their own homework.
Yeah.
But it needs to be investigated independently. And that's what we at CUFI are calling for.
Yep.
An independent investigation into the BBC in an attempt to correct the BBC so that they can get back in line and stop giving a platform for Hamas terror propaganda and to spend license fee payer money in the way in which we expect, not in a way of covering up anti-Semitism either. Because actually I would rather have I mean, I don't support the documentary in any way whatsoever, okay? But if there is Israel's enemies speaking on camera and they're speaking anti-Semitism, we need to hear it.
Yeah.
Not be covered up.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Yeah, we need to hear the facts of it. And this is the thing, I think there's another sort of angle as well, even, which is when they're spreading misinformation about Israel, they are stirring up hatred against Jews in the UK.
Yes.
And that is a massive issue. Maybe that's another angle in which the government needs to investigate it, because actually, anti-Semitism, hatred against Jews is also against the law. And actually those who are inciting hatred are also guilty. And that's why news outlets have such an important responsibility,
Massive responsibility. I mean, at the London School of Economics, we're going to talk about that next. We had a event this week, just gone, where the London School of Economics hosted a book launch for a book which was effectively promoting Hamas. It was called Understanding Hamas and Why That Matters.
Yeah.
Like, this is one of the UK's leading universities.
Yep.
And these young people are going to be fed, or have been fed, the lies and propaganda of Hamas.
Yep.
And actually, with the BBC's investigation is very, very important, like you said, because if it is not addressed, it is giving energy, it's fueling the anti-Israel and anti-Jewish hatred that we're seeing on the streets, that we're seeing in universities.
Yeah.
Because it's just being allowed to get away with.
Yep.
And I would say that the LSE, okay, a university, of course, it should be a place of freedom of speech. It should not be a place where outlaw terrorist organizations are giving a platform.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, and if the government and the police can't tell the difference between that, I trust it can. But if they can't, we have a very, very serious problem in this country.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, personally, I am someone who is adamantly pro-free speech. So I'm a free speech absolutist.
You always tell me what you think.
Yeah, always tell. Yeah, but I also like to listen to the opposing voices. So I'm one of those people where actually I would tone down our laws somewhat to enable all free speech, sort of thing. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that we need to platform every voice. It doesn't mean the BBC needs to platform every voice, and it doesn't mean that universities have to. But unfortunately, the same thing is happening within universities, which is happening within the BBC, which is that there has been this push for pro-Palestinian support, which is very strong within universities. And it's got to the point where their anti-Israel views are now becoming anti-Semitic views. Their pro-Palestinian views are becoming pro-Hamas views. And then they're allowing, because they can't see the wood from the trees. They can't separate out the different viewpoints, because there is nuance to these discussions, and there are different angles to it. But instead, you're just seeing almost like militant pro-Hamas support within universities, because they can't, it almost is like they're not intelligent enough to actually think about these things deeply. They've just turned into sort of
echo chambers.
Yeah, echo chambers, or like sort of minions of a cause or something, or like, followers of a cause, or victims of propaganda. I don't know what it is, but it's
delusional.
Almost like delusional. Yeah, you can't really even rationalize with these people or have a conversation with them. And unfortunately, when you invite people in who are going to be talking about Hamas in a way which normalizes Hamas and downplays their radicalism, all you're actually doing is feeding into the radicalism of those who already hate Israel and hate the Jews.
Yes.
And so, it's just extremely unwise. But unfortunately, I think that is another symptom of what is happening in universities across the Western world.
Yes.
And we also know a lot of this has happened because countries like Qatar, for example, massively fund universities.
Yes.
And Qatar is also the biggest funder of Hamas. Now, Qatar will argue that it's not the biggest funder of Hamas, and that it only gives money to Gaza to support humanitarian causes. But we all
only
know,
to their mothers.
Yeah, only to their mothers, exactly. Only to Hamas's mum and dad. Or mum. Yeah, yeah, that was a good one. But yeah, it's that kind of thing. It's like they can wriggle their way out of this, but ultimately Qatar is funding Hamas.
Yes.
And by the way, UK law states it doesn't matter if you're funding them directly or indirectly.
Yes.
If you're funding them in any way, it's a crime. The same with the messaging. Whether you're spreading the messaging purposefully or accidentally, you're still committing the crime. I mean, we've seen our government throw people in jail because they've retweeted things. Yes. And by the way, from my perspective, retweeting does not mean endorsing. Retweeting means you're just putting out information that's out there. That's not your voice saying it. You're just highlighting a message.
I agree. Yeah.
And yet they are throwing people in prison for retweeting things which they've not even said.
Yes.
And then there's propaganda, open support for a terrorist group in the UK, which is not being dealt with.
Yes. You make a very, very good... Well, you make several very good points, Alex. You make a very good point regarding universities. This has been going on for decades. Funding from these countries, such as Qatar. This has been going on for a generation.
Yeah.
And we're now seeing the effects of that. We're seeing young people exposed to this at universities. We're seeing universities giving platform to terrorist organizations such as Hamas. And again, what's happening at the BBC in the mainstream is just reinforcing all of this.
Yeah.
That just on the whole topic also of giving a platform for propaganda. I know we've been talking about the BBC. I know Al Jazeera is different in that it is an overseas body. Again, Qatar-based, I believe. Qatar-based, owned by Qatar. There is an online channel called AJ Plus. AJ Plus, and I don't recommend you search for AJ Plus because knowing social media, you'll then start getting a load of AJ Plus content. AJ Plus is Al Jazeera's social media channel. It's particularly geared towards young people. Some of those who might have been attending this LSE event in London. Okay, and it is a very, very popular news outlet.
And it promotes itself as liberal. Very much like what all the young people's topics is going on that, isn't it, really?
Very, very much. They'll have environmental stuff combined with anti-Israel stuff on the same thing. It's trying to reach a generation which is cause conscious. And so I did a little bit of research before we came on the podcast looking at the past 3.5 days of content on their social media channel. Okay, you ready?
Yep.
Right, so these topics. Migrants at the Mexico border, one story. The Philippines, one story. Ethiopia, and one story. Dominican Republic, racism. Racism in the Dominican Republic, one story. Issues of human rights in Egypt, one story. Maradona, randomly, one story. Okay. Migrants at the Panama border, 2 stories. Syria, bearing in mind that everything which is happening currently in Syria, we're going to be moving on to that shortly. Terrible, terrible things. One story. Pakistan, currently ongoing. Hundreds of people are held hostage on a train in Pakistan. And the number of stories about what's going on in Pakistan, 0. How about how many stories relating to Palestinians and relating to Israel? 29 stories. That, my friends, is anti-Israel propaganda.
Exactly.
At an alarming scale, alarming rate.
And that's the thing. I've been warning people about we both have been warning people about AJ Plus for a long time. I think you've subjected yourself to torment by keeping in touch with what AJ Plus is putting out there, whereas I've sort of blocked it years ago.
I went on there deliberately.
No, I know. But I'm just saying, but people are fooled by it. I've got family members who have shared me AJ Plus stories about, some environmental thing or polar bears here or LGBT thing or whatever. They're promoting all these different messages which young people are getting sucked in by. and then they're just piling on this anti-Israel narrative.
These are 29 stories.
Yeah.
I can tell you now, they are not balanced. There's
no
room.
balance.
When I say they're relating to Israel, they are pro-Hamas, anti-Israel. And the other thing as well is the content. The comments. Yes.
Like, I mean, you've gone on there and sort of debated people and things like that, but like the comment section is anti-Semitic, not even anti-Israel.
No.
It is anti-Semitic. There is hatred of Jews being stirred up by AJ Plus. And AJ Plus is a few steps away, obviously, from where the BBC's at. But in all honesty, they're both heading in that same direction, sort of thing. The BBC's obviously many steps behind what AJ Plus is. AJ Plus is anti-Semitic.
29 anti-Israel stories, one on Syria.
Yeah, that's the thing.
And only one for every other country.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the generation of journalists which are coming up that will be working at the BBC will be those that are attending universities, such as LSE, that are receiving social media content which is biased against Israel. We need to pray about that. I say they're going to come up. We're going to pray that there will be professional journalists who will come up who fear God.
Yeah.
And who will want to promote the truth.
Yeah.
Who want to find the truth, promote the truth, and not be sucked in to this evil ideology, which is anti-Semitism by propaganda. We've seen the devastation of what anti-Semitic propaganda does on a generation.
Yeah.
We cannot go back to that. We have to, and I think our job here, our role at CUFI here, is not to feel overwhelmed by what AJ Plus are doing and anything like that. We just need to keep putting the truth out there.
Yeah.
And we're thankful to supporters who are sharing the truth from CUFI and other pro-Israel sources as well. I encourage you to keep going.
Yeah, definitely.
Keep doing it.
Yeah.
Get the message out there.
Yeah, I know. I 100% agree. I think we have to realize we are a minority viewpoint. We are, a remnant people. We are trying to put that message out there in a dark world. But when you're saying that, it's a couple of points. Going back to the propaganda these people are getting, we have to realize as well, this is not just anti-Israel, it's also anti-Western, anti-British. I mean, the Rami Corey, who was the one speaking at LSE, London School of Economics, he said that, for example, this was an interview just last month, he was saying to keep the struggle, meaning Palestinian struggle, peacefully if possible, meaning it's not a problem, peacefully, but also you can also do terrorism. And he said, this is a quote, "We are not just fighting Israel, we're fighting the United States and in some cases even the British and German governments." So he's clearly anti the UK. He's not British, by the way. And yet we allow him into the country to promote messages which are not just anti-Israel, pro-Hamas, but also anti our own governments, right? But the second thing I want to say is, so yes, there's that. There is this mass propaganda going on. But also, like you said, when it comes to us speaking the truth, the great thing, what's the Bible verse about the light in the darkness, and the darkness cannot overcome it? Even if we are just a single candle, a candle can be seen from miles away. When you are a light in the darkness, you will stand out and you will shine a light, and other people will see that light and look to you and be drawn to you. Yeah. So that's what we have to be as Christians. We have to be the lights in this dark world, because this is a dark world and it is growing darker. But at the same time, the darker it gets, the brighter we will shine.
Amen.
And so, we need to be those lights for each other, not just us, but viewers as well. We have to be lights in our own churches, in our own homes, in our own communities, and keep shining the light of truth on these situations.
Amen.
Yeah.
Amen. Well, shall we move on to the topic of Syria?
Yeah, we can do.
Because what we have been seeing, and I think, it connects also what we've been saying about the media, because I know that the BBC's kind of have covered some of this, but I tell you what, every time I switch on and watch the news bulletins, I do not see anything.
Yeah, it's hardly mentioned.
It's hardly mentioned at all. And yet we know that there have been, at least 1,000 civilians that have been killed in Syria over the past few days.
Likely thousands.
Likely thousands more.
Yeah.
Now, among them are Christians. Christians are being targeted.
Yeah.
We need to be aware of the... we're going to talk about, and I think you will probably explain some of the political dynamics which are going on, but it's important to recognize that during the month of Ramadan, Christian persecution is at its peak during the year. So we should not just disregard that. Christians are a target.
Yeah.
They are being singled out. And quite frankly, when you hear news about Israel and Gaza, and your first question is, well, what about the Christians in Gaza? And you're not concerned about the Christians in Syria, then that's hypocritical.
Yep.
We have to be well aware of what Christians are going through, and are still very much under threat in Syria. So we know that there has been massive regime change over the past few months since the fall of Assad.
Yep.
We know that there was some uprising of pro-Assad rebels, and in response to that, it seems there has been a very violent, violent attacks by the pro-government Islamist groups, terror groups, targeting the Alawite minorities, of which Assad was one, but innocent civilians belonging to the Alawite communities as well as Christians in those regions. So does that begin by summarizing?
Yeah. So do you want me to expand on it?
Go ahead. Yeah.
So Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, I can never remember that name, but I've got it in front of me.
Known as HTS for short.
So we'll call him HTS, and the leader of HTS is Abu Muhammad al-Jalani, or Ahmed Hussein al-Sharaa. So he's changed his name, put on a tie. And now the whole world thinks he's a moderate, and everyone loves him, which I think goes back to this whole why the media isn't reporting it, because it doesn't suit their narrative. They're trying to paint this picture that Assad was bad and Jalani is good. The reality is Assad was bad and Jalani is bad, and Jalani may be worse. So this is the thing. I think a lot of the times people try and paint the world in black and white. This is good, this is bad. There's a lot of grey area. Syria is one of those nations where we've got obviously HTS. We've got HTS, by the way, is an offshoot of Al-Qaeda and ISIS. Al-Jalani served under the leaders of Al-Qaeda and ISIS. He actually was arrested. He went to war against the British and American forces in Iraq, and he was then imprisoned. He went through the jail system in Iraq, and during that time, he basically, as a very intelligent and good orator, intelligent, well-educated guy, he worked out the systems and the way in which the different Islamist groups operated. He basically became very political and learned how to deal with these different groups so that they weren't constantly trying to kill each other. And he then sort of established himself as a leader and had a leadership role, and people started to follow him. Very charismatic guy. Interestingly, Al-Jalani, he's actually born in, because Al-Jalani might be Al-Ghalani, he was born in the Golan Heights. His family was from the Golan Heights and obviously left Israel. So there's an Israel element, an anti-Israel element. When he speaks about Israel, he doesn't speak about them too favorably. Only when Israel's attacking Syria does he start saying, we love Israel, there's nothing wrong with Israel. But actually, I think deep down, he is very pro-Palestinian, very anti-Israel. And obviously, Osama bin Laden, he was the founder of Al-Qaeda. He was very anti-Israel, pro-Palestinian. He even said one of the motivations for 9/11 was because America supported the Palestinians, supported Israel, and he was pro-Palestinian. And, Al-Qaeda have been the same level, really, of hatred as Hamas, ISIS, Hezbollah, and so forth against Israel. They want to see Israel wiped off the face of the earth. They believe that they need to have, an Islamist holy war against the Jews. And for a long time, though, Al-Qaeda haven't really been an issue for Israel because they've not been a military threat to Israel. They may have put some support for Hamas and things like that, but now, HTS oversees Syria.
Yes.
They have Al-Qaeda in government in Syria.
Yes.
And,
And they have the support of Turkey.
Yes.
So they have the support of Turkey. Assad had the support of Iran.
Yep.
Both Iran and Turkey support Hamas.
Yeah.
But it does seem as though with Iran having been really hit hard by Israel and also suffering as a consequence of Assad's fall, now is on more of the back foot. But Turkey seems to have a gateway of opportunity to impose its influence in Syria.
Yes.
And that could start getting interesting.
Exactly, because Turkey hates the Kurds and they're attacking the Kurds. There's some talk about ceasefire there and resolving that, but ultimately Turkey hates the Kurds. Iran again hates the Kurds. Turkey hates the Druze, and the Druze are in southern Syria. And by the way, I think most of the fighting and things at the moment is the northwestern area, the Mediterranean Sea there. Russia obviously has some involvement in Syria, not so much at the moment, but that was propping up the Assad regime.
But it was popping up, and of course, when Russia was obviously having to focus on Ukraine, that again weakened sort of the stability in which led to Assad's fall. But the Druze, you mentioned the Druze, because the Druze is very significant, because largely speaking, the Druze are very supportive of Israel.
Yeah.
And there's a very strong relationship with the Druze.
Yeah.
Druze.
Druze. D-R-U-Z-E.
Yes. Which goes back a long way and continues today, even with the Druze people serving in the IDF.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, a great statistic to look at to understand how well connected the Druze are with Israel is if you look at conscription of the IDF, when you look at Arab Israelis, generally speaking, it's around 1% of people who serve in the IDF. When you look at the Orthodox Hasidic Jews, again, 1%. When you look at general population of Jewish Israelis, it's 87%. And when you look at the Druze, D-R-U-Z-E, it's 80%. So almost as much as the general population of Israel, and especially the Jewish population of Israel. But again, there is also sort of disagreements within the Druze community. So some of the southern Druze cities in Syria, they want to become part of Israel, and they've pledged allegiance to Israel. Others who are a bit more isolated, for example, there's a community in Beirut, and they are obviously being political.
Do you mean Damascus?
Sorry, Damascus, not Beirut.
Okay.
They are obviously a bit more political and trying not to get themselves killed. Yeah. So they're not pledging allegiance necessarily to Israel. There's also, because the Druze, I'm not 100% sure what their religion is. In fact, it's a secret religion, but it's got some links with Islam and things like that. But basically...
monotheistic.
Monotheistic, but they also... so even though there's religiously, I don't think they've got a reason to be pro-Israel. It does, like you said, it goes back hundreds of years. It goes back to like the 1600s, 1660, I think it is. The Druze were under the Ottoman Empire, and so were Israelis, so were Jews. And basically the Druze had a revolt against the Ottomans. The word for thug in Turkish today is Derzi, which is their word for Druze, because they were basically so rebellious against the Ottomans. Yeah. But what did the Ottomans do during that? They clamped down heavily against the Druze, and as an excuse, they killed the Jews.
Yes.
And so there's Jewish massacres under the Ottomans because they used it as an excuse to kill Jews because the Ottomans hated the Jews.
Yes.
And the same thing happened in Syria. You know, it looks like pro-Assad sort of loyalists may have attacked some HTS. HTS responded. Maybe even Hezbollah got involved in some way in that. But the result is that HTS rebels have used their excuse to kill Christians and literally crucifying Christians. So it's not just, I mean, it is massacres, going into houses, killing them, etc., but also mocking Christianity and purposefully targeting them for their religion.
Yes.
And this is it's a massive problem. The images I've seen are reminiscent of October 7th, in my opinion.
Yes.
And
I think another thing just to add about the Druze, especially the Druze in the south, is that if they are attacked, Israel will likely respond to defend them. In fact, Prime Minister Netanyahu said that if the Druze attacked, Israel would.
Yeah.
So we actually have a situation here where Israel could, directly or indirectly, be involved in Syria as a result or consequence of what is emerging at this time.
Yeah.
Yes, but that's very interesting, drawing that comparison between what the Ottomans did with the Druze and the Jews. And we need to stand up for, the Christian communities.
Yeah.
And we need to pray for the Christian communities. And the jihadist ideology, mentality, which is what is being manifested here, is such that if there was a Jewish community in those same areas, the Jews too would be probably first in line.
Yes, 100%. Yeah, they would kill the Jews first and then the Christians.
Yes.
I mean, it goes back to that old saying that, we say a lot, first the Saturday people, then the Sunday people.
Yes.
Unfortunately, Islamists are against Christians and Jews, and they want to wipe us all out.
So standing with the persecuted church, standing with the Jewish people, is standing in the defense of Western civilization as a whole, the Judeo-Christian values that we hold.
Yeah.
Because sadly, there isn't a Jewish community there, but probably it's good that there isn't. I mean, don't get me wrong, but the Jewish people would be, as I say, targeted at this time.
Yeah.
They are the safest place in the Middle East is the state of Israel.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
It really is. It's also the safest place for Christians. Again, we don't want to see Christians have to leave their homeland in where those particular Christians are in Syria. We don't want to see that. But it's important that when we are praying for and standing with Christians, we are also standing actually inadvertently for the safety of the Jewish people as well.
Yeah.
And I think this is very important to understand the dynamics between Christian persecution and anti-Semitism. Because just to add, really, because I think it's relevant to what we're talking about, in that when I first started working here at CUFI 10 years ago, when we started here at CUFI UK, one of the first things that struck me was the pattern of Christian persecution and what was happening in Europe regarding the Jewish people, because I had just spent about 5 years working with the persecuted church, and I'd seen how there was patterns in terms of what was affecting the suffering church in various parts of the world, leading to various forms of persecution. And so, as I say, when I started working here, and I was learning more about what the Jewish people were facing, and this was 10 years ago, I was identifying those same trends, those same patterns of anti-Semitism, which was quite consistent with what the church was experiencing in some of the worst parts of the world for Christians.
Yeah.
And then it was like a penny dropped, because I thought that what was happening with the Jewish people was reminiscent of what was happening with the persecuted church. But the penny which dropped was that all the areas that we had been working in for Christian persecution, there was no Jewish community. So actually the opposite was true.
Yeah.
The Jew first, the Saturday people, then the Sunday people.
Yeah.
Because had in those areas where the church was suffering, the Jewish people had been present, we would also have seen Jewish anti-Semitism, violent anti-Semitism, equating to that the church was experiencing.
Yeah.
So for me, it was a warning sign for for the rise of anti-Semitism, and also, and we've spoken about the canary in the coal mine, the warning of what church would ultimately face if we do not stand with the Jewish people. So just to summarize, if you want to stand with the persecuted church, stand with the Jewish people.
Yeah.
And if you're a Christian, pray for the persecuted church and pray for the Jewish people. Pray for God's people, because we share, we actually are part of the same battle, but in slightly different ways.
Yeah, exactly. It's God's people being persecuted by Satan.
Yeah.
That is what it is. And I think you've hit the nail on the head there. And I want to just sort of add a little bit to it, because as, we spoke about before, this guy puts on a suit and the world welcomes him. The head of the UN meets with him, shakes his hand and welcomes him. The UK, as soon as he was elected, the UK sent £50 million to Syria in an attempt to promote equality and unity, right? So we send these terrorists a bunch of money, and now they're murdering people. But going back to the politicians, and again, by the way, the head of the ICC met with him, shook his hand. The head of the ICC has arrest warrants out for Netanyahu, is very anti-Israel, and yet he's shaking hands with this terrorist, right? The world has let down Israel, and the world has let down the Jews, and the world has let down Christians.
Yeah.
We cannot trust the world to stand up for us. We have to do it for ourselves. On the flip side, also the church has let down both Jews and Christians. The church is silent. Majority of the church is silent when it comes to anti-Semitism, when it comes to Israel hatred. In fact, the church joins in with the Israel hatred.
Yes.
And then when it comes into Christian persecution, the mainstream church is silent.
Yes.
They do not raise awareness for it. In my opinion, it's deceived. And that's why, we are a remnant people who are supporting this. We're not going to be the majority of the church. We are a remnant people. And that's why it's so important that we are raising these issues, because we cannot rely on the mainstream media. We cannot rely on the mainstream political groups, and we cannot rely on the mainstream church, because we have, because ultimately, there's problems with all three of them. Do you see what I'm saying? Does that make sense?
Yep. But we must rely on the Bible.
Exactly. Yeah. Rely on God. Yeah.
Rely on God. Rely on the truth of God's word. And actually, if we follow what His word says, we really will find clarity by the leading of His Spirit, by the reading of His word. His word is unchanged. And He's faithful. He's faithful to keep His word. And standing with Israel, standing with the Jewish people. I mean, to you and me, and I know to those listening and watching, it is clear as day.
Yeah, exactly.
It really is.
Yeah.
And, we're standing with Israel. I mentioned about Israel being the safest place for Christians in the Middle East. And that isn't just because Israel has tight security. It's because of the values that Israel holds.
Yeah. Something else there. You've just pricked
go
my
ahead.
mind. Yeah. The safest place for Jews as well are Christian nations, or nations predominantly Christian. So it's a flip side as well.
You're right.
Yeah.
Which is probably makes sense why the less Christian we become as a nation, the more vulnerable the Jewish community is.
Yeah.
So the rise in anti-Semitism in this country cannot be ignored, because it perhaps relates to some of the things that we have lost or are losing as a nation.
Yeah.
And that is due to our forsaking of Judeo-Christian values and our adopting of values which are contrary to the word of God.
Yeah.
So you make a very, very good point, because actually, I understand that Israel is the homeland of the Jewish people, but I want my home to be a safe place for Jews if Jews choose to live here. Yeah, that's what I want my country to stand for, those principles. And I know there are countries across the world where Jews, can live safely to a degree, but there are not many.
Yeah. Exactly.
And so I think there's a lot of things we could continue to talk about, Alex, and you've perhaps, I'd like to think we've left some food for thought for people to take away, to think about and to pray about, and to see where the Lord is leading in terms of how we respond to some of these issues that we have been discussing. Please let us know your views. Please let us know your thoughts about this topic and any of the topics that we have discussed in this podcast. We love to hear your views. So please do leave your comments in the comment section below. Also, as we come to the end of this podcast, we must also announce that we do have a petition which is going to be launched any day, and perhaps by the time this podcast is launched. So please do go to www.cufi.org.uk/campaigns, and the petition is calling for the BBC to be investigated. And in light of everything we've discussed, it could not come sooner. So we encourage you to please get involved in that, to add your name, to share it with others, and to take action. We'd also like to thank you for supporting CUFI, and if you would like to make a donation towards the work of CUFI UK, then please do follow the link on the screen and in the description, which is cufi.org.uk/donate. All support is greatly appreciated. It helps us here at CUFI to be able to get the word out, to speak the truth, and to address some of the terrible anti-Israel propaganda which is out there, to help us with our campaigns, to produce our resources, to get the message out. We do need your help, and we want to thank everyone that makes a donation towards our work. But for now, from Alex and me, it's been good to talk again, Alex.
Yep.
Let's just end on a scripture. It is the priestly blessing of Numbers 6. It says this from verse 22. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to Aaron and his sons, saying, This is the way you shall bless the children of Israel. Say to them, The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. So they shall put my name on the children of Israel, and I will bless them. Let's bless Israel and the Jewish people. Let's bless Israel and the Jewish people with our lips. Let's counter all the hate. Let's counter all the anti-Semitism by blessing Israel, by blessing the Jewish people. That's our heart. We know that's your heart too. So thank you for standing with us, and we will see you next time on this podcast for Zion's sake. Bye-bye.